On one end of the spectrum is the typical developer. They put user experience above all else. They feel bad for charging for their app, so they either charge very little or nothing at all. They feel like showing their paywall at all is spamming or annoying the user. They sacrifice things that could earn income from the apps in order to preserve that pure user experience and not annoy the user. On the other end of the spectrum, we have the slimy marketer, the one that uses every trick in the book to try to squeeze every little ounce of revenue out of the user. You've seen it, right? That 3-day free trial with a weekly $20 subscription, or when the paywall shows up, the X to dismiss it doesn't show up for 5 seconds, like all these dark patterns, or they're constantly spamming the paywall nonstop, or you've seen all these dirty tricks. So those are the two ends of the spectrum. So where should you fall on this spectrum? I bet most of you watching this fall far on the pure, holier-than-thou dev end of the spectrum. And I get it, right? It's a noble cause to put the user experience above everything else. But if you're building an app and you're trying to generate revenue from it, you're gonna have to slide down this spectrum a little bit. Now, not too far, let's not get crazy here, but you're gonna have to move out of that far left end of the spectrum towards the middle a little bit. On the surface, putting the user experience above everything else and not even being the least bit spammy sounds correct. Like, who would say no to that? The problem is, if you're trying to get an app off the ground, trying to get its initial users, its initial revenue, like, that's a bad idea. Now, of course, if you're already making 20, 30 grand a month in MRR or whatever number is enough for you, you have tons of ratings, you're ranking organically high on the App Store, things are good, then yeah, you can kind of revert to putting user experience above all else. But if you're just starting out, you don't have that luxury. Now, don't take this to the extreme and think I'm suggesting you go full slime ball mode. That's not what I'm saying at all, but you are gonna have to move down that spectrum a little bit just to get that initial flywheel going, those first users, those first ratings, that first little bit of revenue. I thought this would be a good topic to discuss because of a recent tweet of mine where I asked for feedback on my onboard flow in Creator View. Because in my onboard flow, at the end of it, I show the paywall and then ask for ratings. In the replies, there was some pushback about showing the paywall there and asking for ratings being a bit aggressive when the user hasn't used my app. And I bet 95% of you watching this would agree with that, because it seems like common sense, right? The user hasn't even used my app yet. Why would I show them the paywall? Why would I ask for ratings? Isn't that like very aggressive or spammy? Now look, of course this is a lesser user experience. There's no arguing that, but it is a conscious trade-off. And to me, it's a good example of sliding slightly down the spectrum away from that pure holier-than-thou dev towards the slimeball marketer, but not fully in slimeball territory. And here's my reasoning, because for the past 2 months, I've gone deep down the rabbit hole on this whole app growth monetization world. Talking all kinds of YouTube videos, podcasts, just hours and hours and hours of consuming content. And a common theme that I saw was showing the paywall at the end of onboarding. And most of the time, they would have data backing it up. This app grew revenue by 80% when they showed their paywall and onboarding. And the way I look at that is, that's one app, that's one example. You could be cherry picking data, just small sample size, whatever. So the data is not what sold me. What sold me was just the pure common sense math. Let's say you don't show your paywall during onboarding, which maybe most of you do, right? You probably show it at the quote unquote right time. If your app has restrictions, for example, Creator View, I only let the user for free schedule 7 items per month in the calendar. If they want 8 or more, boom, show the paywall, and you get unlimited access. Same thing with revenue streams. You get 2 for free, 3rd revenue stream, paywall, or let's say you have just a paid feature that they try to access. And that's what most people do, because that makes sense, right? Only ask them to pay at the right time, like when they need it. But what you may not have realized is this means only a very small subset of people who download your app even see your paywall. Let's use some simple numbers to illustrate this. Let's say you get 10,000 downloads. In the example I just mentioned, where you only show it at the quote unquote right time when they hit a restriction, let's say of those 10,000 downloads, 1,000 to 2,000 actually see your paywall. So a small subset. Whereas if you put it at the end of onboarding, 100% of those 10,000 downloads are seeing your paywall. Now, of course, not every user is gonna make it through your onboarding. I know there's drop off, but stick with me here and keep it a simple example. If you put it at the end of onboarding, everyone that goes through your onboarding is going to see your paywall. So on one hand, 1 to 2,000 of the people that downloaded your app will eventually find your paywall. On the other hand, all 10,000 people that downloaded your app see your paywall. Which one do you think converts more to your bottom line? Of course, the 1 to 2,000 people will have the higher conversion percentage because they're seeing it at the right time. But for the bottom line, it makes sense to me that if you show it to all 10,000 people, that's gonna result in a net gain. Now, of course, there are other variables. You have to have a great onboarding experience, and having a free trial is very helpful in this scenario because the user has the highest level of intent when they first download your app. And a percentage of users will start a free trial without even seeing the app. Remember, you are not your user and price is relative. Yes, it is a fact. Most people hate paying for apps. They do not like it. But there's also a lot of people who are not sensitive to price if your app solves their problem. And those are the exact customers you want. The people that don't like paying for apps, they're just gonna churn away right away. That's not who you should be optimizing for. So I believe showing your paywall at the end of onboarding, if you have a great onboarding experience and a free trial, is the way to go. Because look, they're not mutually exclusive. You can show it at the end of onboarding, and you could still show it at the quote unquote right time when the user hits those restrictions or they try to access the paid feature. You can do both. And here's a weird one. Showing it during your onboarding actually lets the user know they can pay you. Like, I know it sounds crazy, but not all users are afraid of paying for apps. And if you only show it when they hit that restriction or you bury it in the settings somewhere, a user that wants to pay you may not be able to. In fact, Guy Rambo of StackTrace told this exact story on his indie app. He got a customer service email from a person who was like, hey, I'm trying to pay you. I'm trying to buy the premium version, but I can't find your paywall. So again, my point is to optimize for the people who aren't going to be price sensitive if your app solves their problem. Don't optimize for the people that hate paying for apps and don't want to pay. Like you're optimizing for the wrong thing because they're just going to churn away anyway. I spent time on this paywall example because a lot of times growing and marketing your app, like things can be counterintuitive. Because like I said at the beginning, showing your paywall right away and asking for ratings right away, like that seems spammy, it seems bad. But I encourage you to like think deeper about these topics and not just the surface level. Because you got to remember, an app makes their money off a very small percentage of their users. So that very small percentage is who you want to optimize for. So when you frame it like that and think about who you're optimizing for, moving slightly down this spectrum away from the pure holier than thou dev, again, not fully slime ball, but just inching a little bit in that direction, I think you have to do that if you're trying to earn income from your apps. And speaking of paywalls, if you want to run experiments with your pricings or maybe the design of your paywall, today's sponsor, Glassfy, has you covered with the remote paywall feature. But Glassfy does so much more. The ridiculously flexible app revenue management platform helps engineering and growth teams generate predictable revenue streams from their apps. Glassfy takes a platform approach with various solutions natively built in, like payments infrastructure for iOS, Android, and web. I actually use it for creator views app subscriptions, and it was a breeze to implement. It also has revenue growth tools such as rich analytics, paywalls like I just mentioned, and redemption codes so teams can use data to make better decisions to generate revenue, all within the Glassfy platform. So whether you're adding revenue to an existing app or replacing your current setup, Glassfy will help your engineering and growth teams deliver better on their revenue growth goals.